welcome back to another episode of the reality show. I've just been on the daily objective, which means I need to cool myself down a little bit since I'm getting echo. I need to cool myself down since we talked about how Netanyahu, or rather the Israel government, is willing to let the Palestinian Authority take over Gaza, which was crazy thing to even hear about. But today, one of the topics we will talk about is in the news I mentioned earlier, and it's that Hamas is refusing to release hostages until Israel basically ceases all aggression. But the first topic we will talk about is this character I would call Oleg Alexander. I haven't heard about him before. We'll see if our other panelists have heard about him. And he basically signed an open letter in October, so only, I think, couple of weeks after the October 7 attacks, basically calling Israel an apartheid regime and that Israel is involved in genocide. Today with me is Alejandro and Matthew. Hey, guys. And I believe Alejandro has read the actual open letter, the full text. So let's go to him first. What did you think about the letter?
Pretty bad. But I think right at this stage, I don't think that there's a lot of more things to comment on how bad things are, especially in the culture. But I wanted to say something that I've been wanting to say for a good while, and I think it's representative of this letter. And in a sense, I am in favor of a ceasefire, properly speaking. But what does that mean? If you could argue that if someone would lay down their arms, there would be no war anymore. That would be Hamas. So if Hamas would lay down their arms, if they would stop their aggression and they say, okay, we surrender, there would be no fire anymore. There would be no war anymore. And actually, that would be the only time or the only option for Palestinians in the land to have some optionality to be free. But why is it the case that the demands are always on the side of Israel? Why people try to go on the side of Palestinian, or in this case Hamas, instead of going of putting the pressure on people like Hamas? And I would say that they see the better people are really nihilistic and they really want Hamas to succeed. But I think the worse, the better people think that people like Hamas are impossible to change or to be persuaded, and therefore Israel should be the one that should take the lead in stopping the war. And I think that's, first of all, it's terrible, it's crazy, but also it represents a really salient feature of the world as it has become in the last 80 years. If you remember Atlas Shrugged, one of the key things that Dagny sees when she comes back to the world, the real world, is that her brother wants her to deal with the worst people like Coffee Meigs, and as if it was a factor of nature, as if he was just like the railway tracks in the way. And I think there is a similarity with that in the people who are wanting this ceasefire. They want Israel to treat Hamas as another factor of their own lives, as if it was just a metaphysical given, while at the same time it isn't. And I think in that sense there's a real convergence between what you would call the idealists, I don't like calling them like that, but the pro-Palestinian, pro-Hamas people, and the realpolitik people, because the realpolitik also takes the state, the government, the people holding the government as a given, something that you have to deal with to achieve your own ends. But at the same time, they all converge in the idea that the brute, the horrible people are all the same, and that they shouldn't have, and that you should take them as a given and not question their existence. And I think that's the key and crucial thing that you can see in this letter.
So you mentioned a little bit about the ceasefire and basically that not Israel should pursue ceasefire, but Hamas should. I'm wondering how that would even look, since I don't think if Hamas basically gave up, Israel would just leave. I think Israel needs to basically reoccupy all of Gaza and make sure Hamas never does it again. That's the only way they can prevent it. I'm wondering if maybe that will be like one last sort of trump card from the Hamas that they will just say they give up, and there might be like such an immense pressure on Israel after that that they should basically leave since Hamas gave up, that maybe that would work, but I don't know enough about this sort of uh style. I don't know what to even call it, conflict or ceasefire. But let's go to Matthew. What do you, first let's talk about this sort of like ceasefire from the other side, and then we can go back to the letter.
Sure. Well, a ceasefire on Hamas's part surely would essentially be Hamas completely surrendering, laying down their arms, and giving in to the Israelis. That's what that's I think is what the Israelis are aiming for. And I don't see how Hamas could simply say, well, we're going to stop fighting, but we want to stay here. I don't think that's realistically going to happen, because apart from anything else at this point, I don't think the Israelis are going to settle for that. And I've got to say, I'm surprised actually that Netanyahu seems to be, at least so far, withstanding the kind of international pressure to just stop short of what they've said they want to do. I don't know if that answers your question, Daniel.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I think so. I cannot
Mm.
really someone else talking. Yeah, I cannot really see yeah how that would go on. But let's talk about so first, Matthew, have you read the whole letter? If you did, what
Um,
did
I've
you think? Yeah.
I've read most of the letter. Very, very muddled and confused, it seems to me. They seem to actually acknowledge that gays have far better rights in Israel than under Hamas in Gaza, but then just seem to have this complete, almost moral flip around and sort of say, but we should stand up for Gaza anyway because they're suffering the most because of what Israel are doing. So it just seems very, very backwards and probably typical of the woke mindset, dare I say. The way they've written it and the position they seem to be taking. Whether Ollie Murs should be removed from the Eurovision Song Contest, I'm not sure. I'm generally opposed to sort of cancel culture, and I guess that cuts both ways. He's entitled to his views, even when I think he's wrong, I would have to say.
So yeah, let's since now you mentioned it, let's talk about the Eurovision itself. Since somehow it went completely by me, so I still have very little knowledge about what Eurovision actually is. But Alejandro, you seem like you want to chime in with
Yes.
something.
Well, I think we should give the audience a bit more context on more or less what the letter is and who signed it. But especially the letter is about 1,400 plus queer individuals and organizations signed an international statement on solidarity with Palestine.
Mm.
And I think, as Matthew said, it essentially states that they are in favor of Palestine, that they think that what this is happening is crimes against humanity, that it's a tragedy because of a violent history of occupation, that they grieve alongside them. I think maybe we should talk a bit more on how they defend the queer issue, which Matthew briefly mentioned, because there are some philosophical points which should be made. But before that, I think this letter was also signed by someone called Ollie Alexander, which is the UK representative of Eurovision. And I don't watch TV, but so maybe Matthew would help us a bit more with that. But Eurovision, what I know is that it's essentially a contest where all the European countries participate each year by basically singing along, and one of the one of the key singers or groups that came out from them was ABBA in the 1960s, if I recall correctly. But essentially, this guy is very public, and he gave his word and publicity to this letter.
Matthew, you want to?
Exactly. Yeah. Eurovision actually is an organization of public broadcasters from various, mostly European countries, but it's slightly wider. It includes places like Israel, and in the past, I believe I'm right in saying, has included Russia, but they're currently suspended because of issues. In recent years has also come to include Australia, because one of their broadcasters there seems to, as I understand it, specialises in importing European television shows. And every year Eurovision organises this song contest, and it's probably the thing Eurovision's actually best known for. And there are candidates, singers or groups from each of the member states who essentially on the night all take turns singing a song, and then at the end of it, the audience watching at home can either dial in or text, or however you want to do it these days, voting for any act other than the act from their own country, rather amusingly.
So something you reminded me with the kicking off, or basically not allowing Russia to participate in Eurovision. It reminded me, yeah, I heard this story when it was happening, and a lot of people were making the argument that Eurovision shouldn't be about politics, and that it should be just about, the art, the songs. And now we basically have the same thing when this person, I'm trying to, Ollie, is it Alexander? Ollie Alexander, basically, if he was banned, it would be because of politics. It would be because he signed a document, basically anti-Israeli document, or you could say pro-Palestinian or even pro-Hamas. And Matthew already said he generally wouldn't support such bans. So first I'll go to Alejandro if he would support it, and then I want to talk about maybe even the Russian thing that happened a couple of years ago.
If I would support that the BBC bans Ollie Alexander, that's a very complex question, mainly because the BBC is owned by the government of the UK, and therefore having any opinion or having any decision upon that could be considered to some extent, censorship. I certainly dislike what he says and how he says it, and I think it has proven to be a large controversy that the BBC tries to remain relatively neutral regarding the statements of the people that participate with them. For instance, Gary Lineker recently that made some pretty disgusting comments as well. But and it was a whole issue. Had he violated the neutrality policy of the BBC? So in a sense, I don't know. It's the proper answer. I think that that's one of the things that you encounter when you have a state-owned body, which in theory represents every single one of the people that pay the fee of the BBC. So that's my answer. I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, we've encountered pretty much similar issue when we talk about the presidents of the US colleges basically not not having policies against anti-Semitic statements, let's say. And to what extent should government intervene in that? I mean, they are private colleges, and I don't think I think it should be public pressure, and there was enough public pressure for at least one of the presidents to resign. And I think I read something recently in the news that they even convinced her and a large number of staff to actually watch the October 7 attacks. And from what I read, she just left the room. I'm not sure if she even commented on it. But Matthew, you seem to pretty much agree that the issue that this sort of state broadcasting network and even the Eurovision itself, it seems like a sort of a group of different state networks, makes it really hard to basically say if someone should or should not be banned.
Well, I think if you just checking I'm not muted. Yeah, if you start banning particular individual acts because of their political views, I mean, I just think, how far do you take that? Where do you actually draw the line? And I would have to say I differentiate that from the issue of Russia, because Russia are indisputably the aggressors in what's happening in Eastern Europe with Ukraine. So I would argue I would argue there is a distinction there between sort of banning a country on the basis that they've started a war and potentially banning an individual act because of their political views. To me, it's two different things.
Well, what do you think, Alejandro, about banning Russia from the Eurovision as opposed to just individuals from specific countries?
I think it makes more sense, certainly, mainly because some of these countries are at war, and you will probably have to decide between which one you will support and which one you don't. But I'm not very strong on this statement, so I could be convinced otherwise. But Daniel, I think the letter has some interesting lexicon which maybe we should talk about.
Yeah, you can bring it up because I didn't have time to actually read the whole letter.
So I think one of the things that we've been hearing about people who are more pro-Israel and are struck by the notion that the LGBTQ representatives, which I'm not sure if they are so representative, but the spokespeople for the movement have been so pro-Israel, so pro-Palestine, despite that in that country there is no respect for those rights, or I mean, you can be killed for being gay or lesbian, let alone the whole idea of Francis sui generis. But the letter has a comment about that, and I think it's interesting to see what they say. Basically, it says, "We believe that standing in solidarity with Palestine is a queer issue. Those who question our support for the Palestinian struggle on the basis of gay rights forget that the criminalization of homosexuality in much of the world stems from colonialism. We too understand the power of propaganda and the media that serves the interests of those in power, rather than those who struggle for liberation on the margins of society. Queer and trans Palestinians have highlighted that pinkwashing plays a significant role in Zionist propaganda. And it continues. But I want to highlight this notion of pinkwashing. I had never heard about it, and I had to go to the dictionary, or at least to Wikipedia, to see what it means. And essentially, what they try to convey is the notion of, hey, of people trying to defend. They want to give a connotation of those people who say, hey, in Israel, there is more respect for queer rights or gay rights or lesbian rights, and therefore you cannot complain about what Israel does. And they hold that view and they say, oh, that's pinkwashing, which means if the other country respects more the rights of a country, it can do whatever it wants to the other country in question just because it respects more rights. And I think that this is actually a really good representative of what an anti-concept is. But before that, I think you, Daniel, or Matthew, if you have any thoughts about these concepts, it would be quite appreciated if you think as well that it was an anti-concept.
Let me just quickly jump in before Matthew, because yeah, when you mentioned this term of pinkwashing, and I think I almost know specifically what they refer to. I think we've all seen that picture of Hamas soldiers with the LGBT flag in in Gaza, and I think the subtext was something, the first LGBT flag in Gaza or something similar. So I think that's what they are kind of pointing to. Let's go to Matthew, but yeah, it's really ridiculous to basically the fact that you like respect more rights is somehow bad.
Well, I have to say, I'd never come across the term pinkwashing before reading this letter, and I'm a bit like Alejandro. I had to actually type it into Google just to clarify what they were actually talking about. But yeah, it is just completely backwards because they are, as gay people, as gay rights organisations, are backing quite consciously the side that doesn't support gay rights over the side that's, or the country that, as far as I am aware, has the most gay rights of any country in the Middle East. It's just what, one has to wonder at the mentality behind it, really.
Alejandro, would you like to continue?
So I think this anti-concept, and I think it's an anti-concept because it tries to give connotation rather than denotation. It tries to say, oh, you aren't pinkwashing, right? It's rather, instead of saying, oh, this is a bad thing, we should think things in another way. Let's be more thoughtful about the ways in which we judge people. And I think it's so pervasive and so bad because it doesn't allow you to think in terms of rights to judge nations and governments, which is the way in which you should judge nations and governments. And certainly, a right-respecting country or a gay right-respecting country can do evil things. It doesn't mean that immediately from respecting rights or certain rights, you will respect the rights of other people, or that you will conduct yourself in a pristine way at war. But that's different to think in terms of, because in terms of rights, and therefore that you have some moral high ground on which to stand up or on which you justify yourself in your self-defense. And I think it's very, very pervasive to put things in these terms. Now, there's also some like the argument has to be completed by some other, by throwing the guilt against something else. They're saying, oh no, the reason why there's homophobia and there's no respect to LGBTQ rights is because colonialism. That's the Pandora box that was opened. Those are my words. That was opened, and therefore that's the thing that triggered the evil. It's not because Palestine believes in that, and I think that's so outside any factual or rational way of thinking about it that you should really question the degree of stickiness to reality that the people who wrote the letter have.
Yeah, let me just quickly comment on the one more time on the pink washing, because I just quickly Googled it, and apparently the concept was created specifically for Israel. It was created to talk about basically the fact that Israel is as far as I know, probably the only nation in the Middle East that has some respect for the LGBT rights. And yeah, this sort of like blaming colonialism in everything, on everything. I'm trying to just connect the dots, like how could they even like, what's the connection really? The only one I'm thinking about is that probably when those nations, like in the Middle East or Africa, that were colonized, at the time those nations didn't respect LGBT rights, and it just stayed over until now. And I'm just thinking, so do these people like not have any agency over them? What is the like? What do they actually think about like the other people in Middle East? They are like not smart enough to figure out that maybe you shouldn't stone people for their sexual preference. Matthew, what do you think about?
Well, uh, obviously, anti-gay laws, unfortunately, were introduced to some of these places in colonial times, but most parts of the world now, whether they're former colonies or what, have moved away from those kinds of laws and have since, in most cases, since the mid 1960s, sort of 60 years ago. Israel's got rid of all of those kinds of laws a long time ago, and as you say, why is it that particular countries have held on to them even if they were originally the product of colonial times? They ought to be capable of making the decision themselves as a society rather than being stuck with things which were introduced back when they were colonies of other parts of the world.
Anything else from the text, Alejandro, or should we move on to the next topic?
Let's go to the next topic.
Okay, so we mentioned it on the daily objective as part of the news, but let's talk about it a bit more here. And I'm trying to, oh, where did I put it? Oh, right. That basically Hamas has refused to negotiate about releasing any more hostages until Israel ceases aggression, which I mean, we just talk about, the colonialism and the sort of inverted nature of it. And here we see the same thing, like well, you are the ones who attacked. Why is now Israel like supposed to basically cease all aggression? I'm a bit surprised to see this basically demand from Hamas. They might be trying to basically pull the strings of the West and basically say, well, Israel should care about the hostages, so it should stop aggression so they could get more of them out. for a while, I was pretty glad to see Israel being very strong on this issue and basically saying until Hamas stops its aggression, there will be no negotiation. But I've already read that from some of the top Israeli politicians that they are in some sort of active discussion with, I think it was specifically the Qatari leadership over some sort of agreement. So let me go now first to Matthew. What did you think about the first time when you saw this news that why do you think Hamas refuses to negotiate until the hostages are, until the aggression is stopped?
I suspect, and I may be completely misreading the situation, that Hamas never expected it to carry on this long and never expected to take the kind of damage that the Israelis have actually done to them as an organisation, and that they are now getting quite desperate to stop the fighting, because Israel is actually getting quite close to, insofar as their current capacity to attack Israel. I suspect Israel may be getting quite close to having basically smashed it, and they want to try and stop things before it gets to that stage. If you remember, a few weeks ago, they were willing to negotiate hostage releases in exchange for, well, there was sort of a temporary pause, and they were willing to negotiate hostage releases in exchange for political, or so-called political prisoners, actually mostly terrorists, of course, being released by Israel. But they seem to have upped the ante in a way, in saying that they want a ceasefire before they'll release anyone else. I think so.
And let me also mention, because there was one other piece of news I read on the Daily Objective. If there was a next hostage deal, Hamas insists that these three prominent prisoners are released also. And those are a potential Abbas successor, Israeli minister's assassin, and a bomb engineer serving 67 consecutive life sentences. So I think there, if Hamas has any game, they are trying to make this have this go on as long as possible. The longer it goes on, the more pressure there is on Israel, and the bigger chance they have to do another October 7 attack. But let's go to Alejandro. Why do you think Hamas is basically refusing to negotiate?
Well, this is the kind of moral conundrums that you encounter when you don't react properly to the hostage problem, and as well when you set the precedent that whenever someone holds you hostage, you can exchange 1,000 people for just one. And I think as any negotiation goes along, people will ask the highest demand possible in exchange for the least possible giving up from them. And I think here they are calling the bluff. They're saying, give us everything that we want in exchange for 40 people. In my view, despite that it's terrible to leave 40 of your people behind, I don't think it's justified. And I think that those people should have been, those hostage people should have been either located and brought back. But if not, sadly, leave them there. And then fight the war, try to see if you can rescue them when you win the war. But if right now, I think Hamas is calling the bluff, and I'm not sure to what extent Israel is going to allow all of this in favor of that. But I think in turn, every single thing that you give to Hamas, as you very well said, Daniel, is going to become your avenger tomorrow. So in that sense, you cannot negotiate with them. You cannot give them anything, not because it's good to stop the war, or it's good to release your the hostages, which is quite frankly, I think it will be great for them and their families. But at the same time, that will become something that will come back with full force if you allow Hamas to continue to survive.
So something that we pretty much said, I think it was one of the first clips we released after the October 7th, and it was a Raza clip saying that basically Israel should go in with basically understanding that these hostages are good as dead. If you manage to rescue any of them, that's great. But if you are going to sacrifice, or basically, yeah, going to risk the lives of all of your soldiers, and you are also risking the lives of all the future civilians, of all the future hostages, if you don't actually fully commit to destroying Hamas, because these hostages are not a result of basically this October 7 attacks. These hostages are the result of all the past negotiations Israel was involved in, of all the past, as you mentioned, the 1,000 Palestinian hostages for one Israeli soldier. Anything you would like to add to this, Matthew?
I don't think so. I mean, I agree with what you've just said, certainly.
Okay, I'm not sure if I have anything new. Alejandro, do you have anything to add to this topic?
Not this time, thank you.
All right. So I think we'll wrap this up. Thank you, Alejandro, and thank you, Matthew, for joining me today. We should be back tomorrow with both the Daily Objective and the reality show. And also, I should be sure to mention we also already have a scheduled Daily Objective for Saturday, and it's going to be the David Deutsch interview that was meant to happen a couple of weeks ago, but it had to be postponed. So it's going to happen this Saturday. That's 5:30 p.m. UK time. That's 12:30 p.m. Eastern and 9:30 a.m. Pacific. And it's going to be about the anti-Semitism in Britain. So make sure to tune into that on Saturday. Thank you, Alejandro. Thank you, Matthew. Thank you, everyone, and bye-bye.